Welcome to our final session of the conference with Dr. Vyvyane Lowe and Dr. Mark Cucuzzella. My name is Jim Lenny. I'm a retired gastroenterologist and a board member at Agraria, and I'll be your host today. I would like to start the discussion off with something that Mark had alluded to. So the US healthcare system spends $3.5 trillion a year, the highest per capita of any country in the world. And yet we have this unbelievable obesity and other diet-related disease problem. Why do you think that is? Why have we spend that amount of money and have actually gotten a much, much sicker society than we did 50 years ago?
I don't know if maybe I'll chime in first, that Vyvyane tag on. I mean, we're a fee-for-service system, and our medical system is highly influenced by pharma, and big food highly influences policy for things such as the dietary guidelines and what's in stores. So if you have a toxin that's affordable, accessible, and acceptable, like cigarettes were 20 years ago, and we know it's causing disease, we make them less affordable, less accessible, and less acceptable. You can't smoke in hospitals now. But our toxins we put at the checkout counter and the end caps and highly discount them, and we allow people with SNAP benefits. Mountain Dew in my state is the #1 item purchased on SNAP. Soda is the #1 item purchased with federal dollars. So we're using federal dollars to create a sicker society. So unless we get pharma and big food in the game to prevent this stuff, so how can we incentivize the food industry to make foods that are affordable, that don't create a diabetic population? So it goes, I testified twice in front of the Dietary Guidelines Scientific Advisory Committee. And I think Vyvyane, did you testify there too? Yeah, we had like 5-6 clinicians testifying in 3 minutes, but the rest were lobbyists. So I knew which direction it was going to go. They weren't going to, have as an option in the dietary guidelines a low carbohydrate option, even though 2/3 of this country are medically obese. And the people that need advice are not the people who are well. If you have people who are well, like our grandparents were, they didn't need the government's advice on how to eat. It's the people who aren't well need her advice. So the whole thing's upside down. That's just the beginnings of it. Robert Lustig, read Metabolical, read Hooked, read anything by David Ludwig. These are, he's Harvard endocrinologist. They go into some of the policy suggestions, like what would it take? That's why we can't, if we're going to flatten this curve, we have to apply like Manhattan Project level of thinking, meaning we're all in, right? That's how we got a coronavirus vaccine, right? You lock the smartest people in the room and you get the science right, and you don't leave the room until you get it right. You can't just work around the edges and, tell kids to eat more fruit or something and think it's going to reduce obesity. Telling anyone to eat more of anything, at least in my opinion, isn't going to reduce obesity. But that's, yeah, I don't know, Vyvyane, what else you want to throw in there?
Yeah, Vyvyane, it seems like our system is clearly broken and there's the wrong motivation.
There's no incentives. The financial incentives are more care.
Correct. We get paid for the care that we give. So do you have any insights or suggestions in how we might change the direction of our current healthcare model?
Vyvyane, let's see if Vyvyane, you want to throw in any? You've been working a long time too. Those are just some observations I have.
Well, I totally agree with you, Mark. I'm going to be less delicate and just say that nobody gets paid in the healthcare industry when you're not sick. Sorry. We only get paid when you're sick. So if that is how the system is set up, well, then everybody's incentive is to have lots of sick people, put it bluntly. And I think when you structure the healthcare system that way and the incentives are geared towards keeping people sick, then you're really, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised. And in fact, you know, I think then that we should expect that more people will get sick, right? I mean, if we think it through.
Yeah, then the industry wins. Yeah, we don't have a national healthcare system. I think until we have some type of a national healthcare system, I don't think that, I don't think this will go away. We need some incentive of population health.
So, you know, in way back in ancient China, right, the emperor's physicians, uh, it was off with their heads if the emperor got sick, right? Because you guys are not
Wow.
doing the job, right? If the guy's
Love it.
sick, if the emperor's sick, then you're really sleeping on the job. So you're done, right? I mean, imagine if that were our system. And unfortunately, we don't teach uh, prevention. And actually, let's just say we don't even know what health is, because health is merely defined as absence of sickness in our current system, right? So nobody really has even a good definition of health. The medical school system is prioritized again towards the use of medications. There's absolutely no curriculum around or thoughtful curriculum around nutrition, around lifestyle modification. So, you know, when you have, you know, a whole semester of pharmacology and at best an hour of nutrition, well, it tells you what you need to know about how we're taught to treat patients in the world.
So there's
And
no
when I
money.
say I love Vyvyane, I think she's much more,
Yeah.
more right to the point. So I need to hang out with Vyvyane a little more, just tell it like it is.
So Vyvyane, I do want to clarify one thing for our audience. Can you explain the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes so that people don't think they can necessarily cure type 1 with diet alone?
Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, and your own immune system destroys those beta cells in the pancreas so that then you're not able to make your own insulin. Interestingly, though, there seems to be some relation to gut dysfunction. And prior to onset of type 1 diabetes, most patients will report some kind of gastrointestinal distress 2 to 3 weeks or maybe up to a month or so before the actual onset of type 1. So there is this suggestion that there's a gut link to the autoimmune disease. Type 2 diabetes is merely that you wear out your own beta cells, you know, by overworking them if you're constantly forcing them to produce insulin.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, one other thing just to tag on. So, and there's other spectrums in between, there's maturity onset diabetes of youth, late onset diabetes of adulthood, and low insulin, high insulin states. But the bottom line is how we prescribe and how people eat is very similar. So I'm on that type 1 spectrum, and this is a glucose meter. And, so I could scan it in my arm and it tells you what my sugar is, so you can see my line. I'm like pretty flat, 111. But if my type 1s and my type 2s, 10 grams of carbohydrates will raise your glucose 40 points if you're diabetic. So that's a good number for people to understand. So what I would eat in the type 1 spectrum, having a C-peptide of 0.3 and a type 2 who's highly insulin resistant, is going to have the same effect on this monitor. It'll blow it up, and then the type 2s will take a long time to come back down. A type 1 tends to, a pure type 1 who's otherwise healthy, just not making insulin, they're much more insulin sensitive. So they're going to go up. And whether they medicate or if they make just that little bit of insulin themselves, they'll have that second phase insulin response that'll bring it down. But I think everyone who's diagnosed with type 1 makes a little bit of insulin. And there's case studies coming out now of we're not offering new type 1s low carb diets because there is some beta cell preservation if they had an autoimmune attack that is now no longer present. Something happened in gut dysbiosis or a virus, we don't know. But sometimes it's a transient phenomena that leaves you with a little bit of beta cell function. We call it the honeymoon phase with type 1s, right? We give them a little insulin, then they can come off their insulin. So there's usually always a little bit of beta cell preservation. And just so we need to give people options at the get-go of a low carb option plan and use a glucose meter. And if they can bring their sugars good, without eating carbohydrates, maybe they can stay off of insulin.
Interestingly, before the discovery of insulin, really the only way to prolong the life of type 1 diabetics was the ketogenic diet.
Total lockdown, yeah.
So,
Sure.
you know, that was really the only way to prolong lifespan. I mean, they still died early, but it was all they had. And certainly if you're type 1, you should be doing a low carb diet only under, you know, supervision of your doctor, a medical professional. But I will say that I think we oftentimes will assume just because someone is type 1 that they can't decrease their carb intake, right? And I don't think that's necessarily helpful. Even I treat type 1s and they have done very well and really, you know, improved in terms of their sugar loads and so forth. That's, you know, really in much better control. And just to reiterate, I heard because Mark was talking about how we have about 1 teaspoon of sugar in our bloodstream, 1.5 maybe, and a slice of bread, just so we have some comparison here, is 5 teaspoons, right?
Yes,
And
5 to
a
6,
bowl of cooked rice is 11 plus
10.
teaspoons. And the people with the really healthy brown rice, that's also 11 plus teaspoons, right? It's great marketing, but it's still carbs.
Yeah, whole grain carbs. Yeah, I put in the chat an amazing book, whether you want to learn about type 1 or type 2, is Dr. Richard Bernstein's Diabetes Solution. He was diagnosed with type 1 in 1946, was an engineer, and was the first person to actually do home glucose monitoring outside of peeing on a stick, because he saw an ad for this machine that was a glucometer, you know, that they were using in ERs to differentiate who was hypo and who was drunk. And he said, I want to get one of those. Started checking his sugars, presenting at scientific conferences, but he wasn't a doctor, so he was dismissed. So then he went to med school at age 46, became an endocrinologist, and he's still going to the gym now at age 86. So I'm listening to what Bernstein's doing, because no one else diagnosed with type 1 in 1946 is probably alive and going to the gym other than Dr. Richard Bernstein. Yeah, he still can do pull-ups.
That's great.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, whatever he's doing, I'm in, right? I'm a flight doc. So Chuck Yeager was the model for anyone involved in military flight, you know? So if you wanted to stay alive doing that job, you read about Chuck Yeager, and you read it. He's from West Virginia too. So we all love Chuck Yeager. He just passed away, but you know, he knew he was a mechanic before he flew planes. So before he would take a plane up, he wanted to know what every bolt on that plane did before he would just arrogantly take the stick, right, and become a painting on the wall, you know, in Tom Wolfe's book, right? You all know that in The Right Stuff, you know, all the pictures at the bar of the fighter pilots and the test pilots, you know, who went to ground. But
sorry, excuse me, Mark, would you mind speaking up?
Oh, yes.
Or
Can you hear?
put your microphone closer to.
Got it. But just talking about, I know what's going on under the hood. This Chuck Yeager model, Richard Bernstein, read the book.
Good. Dr. Lowe, I would like to get back to something you said during your talk about the racial disparities with regard to nitric oxide and the free radicals. And you were saying that, I guess it's theorized what leads to that, but you were suggesting that chronic stress may be a large factor. Have they tried looking at genetics and other issues as well on that, or how are they trying to, you know, sort that out, why we're seeing that difference?
There's this thing. We hardly do, I think, enough research, right, on racial differences or ethnic differences. Most of our studies are still restricted to mostly white Caucasian males. So it's really hard to dissect out, you know, what exactly is happening. And I think that's where we need to be devoting more resources, more research. You know, I think that's what I was talking about in terms of, we often talk about racial disparities in terms of policy and social systems, and certainly they exist. But as a medical professional, I'm asking the question of why, as doctors, we don't know these differences well between ethnicities and how they might, for example, respond differently to different medications and so forth, right? How you might want to prioritize one approach versus another, so I would definitely be focusing a lot on decreasing oxidative stress in my African American patients, and maybe be more eager to use antioxidant therapies, just as an example. I mean, it was such a huge field, and there are differences in terms of our skeletal mass. There's differences in terms of we can look at renal differences. I mean, there's just a whole range, bone density differences, and what does that mean depending on the ethnicity. So I think this is really a time for us to sit back and think through the fact that we haven't addressed these issues, and how do we incorporate it more into our training systems, into medical schools, into residency programs, and also how do we now invest more research into those differences.
Great, that makes sense. Okay, our next question, I'll direct this one to Mark. Somebody asked, what percentage of their body weight must they lose in order to reverse their metabolic syndrome? And I guess at the same time, maybe you could go into one of your case studies to maybe give
so that's actually it's a great question. And Jeff Volek published a study, I believe it was 2018, showing you don't need to lose any weight to reverse your metabolic syndrome. So there's not this, well, you have to lose 7% of your body fat or 7% of your body weight, or else it won't happen. No, you can keep your same BMI and reverse your metabolic syndrome, by reducing the drivers of your metabolic syndrome. And maybe that's just a matter, most just get rid of the liver fat and then they become more insulin sensitive. But if you have someone, say, go to the gym, right, even start some strength training, they just reshape, right? They lose a little of that fat in the belly, but there is no magic threshold of weight loss that you need. So you reverse the metabolic syndrome before maybe you might lose weight. So we have to remove the focus. But Vyvyane, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, just because this is an area of interest of mine. We do a lot of body comps. I have a DEXA. We do not go by weight. Yeah, we do not go by weight. We look at the visceral fat. My preference is for the visceral fat area to be below 80 centimeters squared. And so for some people, depending on their risk factors, I may want it even lower. So generally, 100 centimeters squared and above is increased cardiovascular risk and risk for diabetes and cancer and so forth. Greater than 160 is extreme high risk. I like to get people under 80. And the idea now is to, as Mark pointed out, to look at the body composition, right? If you lose 5 pounds of fat, gain 5 pounds of muscle, your weight will be the same, but you will be very different metabolically. You'll be a completely different creature metabolically. So we need to be more nuanced when we talk about, about weight and fat, because it's really, not that number on the scale. We really have to take into account the bigger metabolic picture.
And I think they just published, it was like 2 weeks ago, they just published 7-year data on the, which was really looking at the DPP. It was the lean, what was the name of the study? But yeah, so the hypothesis was if you lost 7% of your body weight, your diabetes goes away. But so what happened in a year, it actually looked pretty good. It was called the look ahead study. So it was kind of like at a year, they were all praising this study, which supported the DPP, which was the diabetes prevention program, which focused on fat and calorie restriction, which works for a year.
I will say that over time, over time, up to a third of that weight loss may be due to muscle tissue.
Yeah, they all gained it back. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is actually now they're worse off, and diabetics already have a hard time.
Yeah, they're worse off.
So basically, we're actually on a spiral downwards with if you're only focused on weight loss,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And you're not
exactly.
looking at that whole body composition picture. I saw in the comment someone asking about BMI calculated from white Caucasians. So you're correct. A lot of times for the ICD-10
Yeah, the studies.
coding, you have to look at BMI of 30 and above for obesity. I will point out if you are of South Asian, India, or heritage, then a BMI of 25 puts you as obese. Most Asians, 27 will clearly be in the obese. So we don't look at that here, and we're just very cut and dry, and it's one number. And I think if it's given people things to think about, hope you realize it's not as simple as that, and it's way more nuanced than that.
Vyvyane, can I ask you one other question about your comments about hypertension and vitamin C? So if you have a patient who has hypertension but has a normal vitamin C level, are you saying you would still recommend additional supplements above and beyond what's normal to try to bring their blood pressure down?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the half-life of vitamin C is 6 hours.
Yeah, it's not very long.
I'm not sure, yeah, what a vitamin C level is telling me generally. Obviously, if I see very low levels, I will supplement. But, even if it's within normal range, I'm not sure. I may have caught them at a certain time where we see some vitamin C, right? So I'm not sure. I tend to supplement. It's well tolerated, and generally, especially if you have additional stress, like an infection, or you've had poor sleep, I tend to prefer to go a little higher on the vitamin C. And then there's issues of people worried about kidney stones and renal function. And honestly, I do keep an eye on that, but I can't say that's been a major issue at all.
Well, vitamin C is water soluble, so it probably shouldn't build up too high in your body, right? Won't you
No.
excrete?
I think they just worry about people with renal dysfunction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark, I have a
question
question.
about a cord in there. I can address that one. The question about a cord, about the A1C loosening in
yeah.
a cord.
Yeah.
So most people probably don't know what a cord is. I believe it was published in maybe 5 years ago, but it was a study, large federally funded study, to try to look at tight control of type 2 diabetes with an A1C goal, using medications and looking at outcomes, hard outcomes. So A1C is not a hard outcome. Hard outcome is, do you live or die, or all-cause mortality, and cardiovascular mortality, cancer, these are called hard outcomes, not intermediary outcomes. So the hypothesis was, well, if we lower A1C, people will do better. But the study was actually stopped early. And what they showed was the more medications it took to lower the A1C, specifically sulfonylureas, high insulin, even the glitazones, they died sooner with lower A1Cs. Now, if you've listened to Vyvyane and I's talk, it shouldn't be too surprising, because if we're slamming you with more and more insulin to make your A1C lower, then it's not a good idea. Now, just letting people have high A1Cs is not a good idea either. So it comes back to, if we can lower your A1C without more medications, you're getting healthier. So it shouldn't be, well, let's just relax the A1C because the medications are not a good idea. It's like, no, it's nonsensical. It's like, well, no, stop. We learned from this. The insulin resistance and the hyperinsulinemia is the disease. The A1C is a marker. If someone's on 800 units of insulin a day, we see patients on these crazy doses and they're gaining and gaining weight. They feel horrible. They can't make any energy, but their A1C is good. That's not good. But if we just let them eat donuts and their A1C is 10, but the medications are not good, that's not good either. So let's fix the problem. Let's get rid of the root cause. Most of it's dietary, but yeah, stress, sleep apnea, lack of physical activity, ethnic variations, but it's an important study to learn something from, that just confirms the Gerald Raven work, that it's hyperinsulinemia has its other whole state of nefarious consequences, and insulin resistance is the disease, right? Ben Ben Bickman just wrote a really succinct book called Why We Get Sick. Ben Bickman, and just listen to him on YouTube, one of his videos. And he's an insulin researcher, so he explains it just beautifully about hyperinsulinemia. So I hope that answers that. Yeah, Why We Get Sick, Ben Bickman.
Thank
That's a wonderful book. Right? I give that book away to medical students. I have 2 books now that I give away. They check them out when they rotate with me. It's Metabolical and Ben Bickman's book. But then they also have got a whole library of books, and I wrote a book myself. I'll have them read, which covers a lot of topics about health.
Within your 2 practices, where does bariatric surgery fit as a treatment for obesity?
Yano, do you want to take that one first, Vyvyane, or I'd be glad to.
A third of my patients are referred by the bariatric surgeons after they have had the surgery, lost some weight, regained the weight. And so I welcome all patients. Listen, I look at it, it's a tool, right? And the patient and their doctor hopefully had a good discussion, and the patient made a decision that I respect. If they come to me and they need help, I'm there to do whatever I can to help them. I do feel that any tool you use must address behavior change, though.
Yeah, exactly. I have a number of patients referred before and after. We're trying to food addiction. So if we don't address, so many of these folks are food addicted, and we just need to be really clear about that. Now, one of the tragedies I'm seeing now, 5 years, 10 years out of bariatric surgery in some of these patients, is they're malnourished. They may have lost some weight, they gained some back, but if we've done one of the more radical procedures, which is called like a Roux-en-Y or duodenal switch, if you've removed the small intestines, well, let's just go to evolutionary biology. We have a small intestine to absorb certain nutrients, and they become malnourished because they have all these nutrient deficiencies. You have all these complex labs. Now, I wanted to yell at my phone. It was on there was a podcast called The Curbsiders, which I really like, and it's an internal medicine podcast, and they were interviewing, quote, the leading bariatric surgeon up at the Brigham, big Harvard hospital. And she said in that podcast twice that it's the only effective way for weight loss, with extreme confidence. And okay, well, that was all fine, right? She does bariatric surgery and she has medical students rotating with her. But then they were talking in the end, and this is what made me want to cry, because she's like, yeah, the most enjoyable part of my job is figuring out all the nutritional deficiencies that they have and how to, sort that out. And I'm just pausing. I'm like, wow, these are iatrogenic complications. And if you're listening to this, an iatrogenic complication is a complication caused by medicine. So here you're making light, and it's a game that you have these people that you took their stomachs and small intestines out that have B12 deficiency, thiamine deficiency, iron deficiency, protein malnutrition, bloating, like you name the complication they're having. And it's a game to sort out what their problem is. And you're making light of that. It's a tragedy. And now I'll share one story with you that will make you it blew my mind, and I left defeated. So I was the American Academy of Family Physician representation at a policy discussion sponsored by the RAND Corporation at the Department of Health and Human Services, maybe 4 years ago. And all the leads in obesity in the country were there. You had the CDC, American Academy. It was about pediatric obesity. You had childhood obesity centers, pediatric bariatric surgery centers. And somehow, as a family doc, they invited me in the room. I was nominated by the AAFP, maybe because I was a disruptive voice. And there was a presenter there who led a bariatric surgery center somewhere in the Midwest. And she said this, that we put them on this extreme, because it's a very risky surgery in children from an anesthesia perspective. Okay, they have they have airway issues, right? So ectopic fat is in the tongue and the throat, right? They gain weight here, and their airway is really compromised. So it's risky surgery, this bariatric surgery, and morbidly obese. So she said, we put them on this extreme diet for 4 weeks, and they lose all of their liver fat and they lose 10% of their body weight, and surgery is easier, safer. So I raised my hand. It's my only comment in the whole damn meeting because there's a bunch of bigwigs there. And I raised my hand and say, ma'am, respectfully, can you tell me what this extreme diet was? She's like, oh yeah, they eat meat, eggs, fish, vegetables, some cheese. And I just paused. I said, well, isn't that what we want kids to eat? And then I actually pulled up a study. It's like 4-week ketogenic diet prior to bariatric surgery. And buried in the discussion was this. What was surprising about the diet was that they liked the diet. So what does that make if you're there listening? Wait, they lost 10% of their body weight, liver fat went away, and they liked the diet. So what should we offer them? This is an extreme diet, right? It's what I showed you the pictures of, right? This is an extreme diet, like lots of salmon and farm vegetables at the farmer market, and maybe some avocado, and stir fry the vegetables with amazing seeds. So I'd left that room and I'm like, if these are it's like the Manhattan Project, right? You get all the smartest people in the room and you solve the problem. And I left, if these are the smartest people in the country to solve pediatric obesity, I'm in the wrong room. I'm in the wrong room.
Yeah.
And that was the room. That was the people I just cried. And I was like, well, on we go, maybe in 10 years. Yeah, and now they're advocating for more. And this lady who gave this podcast, you can look it up. I don't want to name names, just podcasters. Look, find it yourself and don't take my opinion on it. Make your own. But she was advocating in the end for more bariatric surgery to do it earlier. Because yes, diabetes will go away if I take your stomach out, if I take your small intestines out. But I'm not creating, in 10 years, when I see these people 10 years, 5 years out, it's a disaster. It's a disaster.
If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's
these people are, and then they're medical patients for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, but again, like for some, they do it. It's the right thing. And I think if we can control their food addiction, the gastric sleeve, but again, the weight loss is not as good because you still have your small intestine. They can eat through that sooner. But if you have control of your appetite and control of the addiction, the gastric sleeve might be a better way to go.
I think I just want to point out that eating is not always related to hunger, right? There's physiologic hunger. And then there are other types of hunger, such as emotional hunger. And so I have many patients who can't tell what kinds of hunger they have. I have patients who are never hungry physiologically, right? But they're eating for other reasons to self-soothe and so forth. So I think it's a very complex issue. I can't say that, one thing is going to fix everything. I do think we have to look at the bigger picture. Obviously, I do prioritize nutrition. I do prioritize behavior. And then I think we can use different tools, but to use them judiciously and to use them intelligently. I am not, for example, against the use of medication. I am for the judicious and intelligent use of medication. I just think it becomes really a little, I have to say, laughable when someone's on 15, 20 medications, and this one's for the side effects of that one's for the, what are we doing at that point, right? And I think we need to sit back and think about what we're doing, look at the bigger picture, and include the patient's behavior in there. And then we have these different options that we can use as tools to support us if we see fit, to use them.
Thank you. I have one other question. We're learning more and more the power of the gut microbiome and how it may be, related to our thinking and to all kinds of functions throughout our body. And this is hearsay that my daughter's is at Cincinnati Medical Center, and she's doing some research, and she was telling me about a group of mice. They had a group of obese mice and a group of normal weight mice, and they did fecal transplants from the obese mice to the normal weight mice, and those normal weight mice became obese, and vice versa, from the normal weight mice to the obese, and they lost weight. So it seemed to be mediated through the gut microbiome. Is there research out there like that or involving humans or?
That was in 2013, and then they used humans and did fecal transplant to the germ-free mice with the same results, right? And then at that point, same year, FDA just said no more fecal transplant work because we don't quite know what we're dealing with. I kind of agree now because obviously when you think about fecal transplants, you worry about infection risk. But, you know, we never thought we might be, you know, transferring a trait, obesity, mental health, you know, there are many things now, depression, schizophrenia associated with the gut. And if we don't know what we're doing, I think it was a good idea maybe to just take a pause and, you know, they are doing now more studies with autism spectrum and gut microbiome. So with the obesity, I haven't seen that work progress. Although I will say the same year, at the end of that year, 2013, there was one case report from the UK in a woman who had fecal transplant because she has C. diff that was not responding to antibiotics. And she was a marathon runner and was very healthy. After the fecal transplant, she luckily survived the C. diff infection, but for the first time in her life, without changing her habits or her diet, she became obese. So there's some suggestion that, you know, that might be involved. And perhaps in the future, we could be doing, University of Toronto makes synthetic poop. So they culture out, you know, the strains of healthy donors, and then they kind of make their own poop, and then they do that as a transplant. And they've used that mostly for C. diff. So maybe in the future, we will start seeing more of that kind of work. So I'm not sure, but hopefully we will be exploring that a little bit more.
Yeah, Robert Lustig and David Perlmutter write a lot about this also, you know, protect the liver and feed the gut, you know, so the purpose of fiber, you know, fiber, which is in that apple you eat, not in the apple juice, you know, is really that those carbohydrates feed the 6 trillion bacteria in your gut, which is its whole neurologic and endocrine system. You know, so what we want to do just as a human species is, you know, there's no quote healthy microbiome. There's whatever your microbiome is when you are healthy is good for you. And we know that the diversity of species in the Western diet is less than the rainforest of someone who eats a diversity of foods. You know, so that's the role of fiber is not to make you poop, but to feed your microbiome. So you know, I know there's a large number of people now going like full carnivorous, you know, no plants, no nothing. And, you know, when you're fully diabetic, I think that's probably a reasonable plan if you want to do it, because you'll reduce your insulin resistance. But ultimately, I think, you know, add some plant-based fibrous foods into your diet. But again, like everyone responds a little bit differently. You know, I would say that I probably eat what would be called a plant-based diet, even though people think, you know, I'm like this carnivorous, low carb person, but like everything I eat is on top of some plants. You know, I'll just throw the meat in the salmon. You know, if I make an egg dish, it's always got vegetables and avocado on top. So yeah, we eat plants and animals as humans, right? That's our human ancestral diet. We eat plants and animals. And the ancestral plants are not these modern GMO, super sweet, highly palatable, monocropped corn and wheat. Those are not ancestral plants in any part of the world. Yeah, lots to learn, right? That's why we have intellectual humility. You know, I don't think you can just do a fecal transplant on someone who's not well and it's going to like take, and then they could go back to eating junk food. You know, I don't think there's no hacks. I hate the word hack. Like there's going to be some pharmaceutical hack, you know, but some company's going to want to do some study of some product they make for some short-term outcome and make everyone think, well, this is the new holy grail. You know, I can just hack that and get it versus change your lifestyle, which is hard, right? This is discipline. It's not willpower. It's discipline. You know, you have to change.
One of my concerns is, you know, people getting taken advantage of. The whole probiotics industry is, you know, probably hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And unfortunately, we're just in the infancy of our understanding of the gut biome and what's, you know, we don't even really hardly know what's normal yet. Yeah. And I think it's going to be many, many years before we actually no species of bacteria or species of fungi or species of protozoa that are associated with inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel or whatever. And yet people are being sold these, probiotics, which who knows, when you throw a few thousand organisms into a well-balanced milieu of trillions of organisms, that you're going to change anything or what, and they don't have to prove that through any kind of science-based research, since they're
Yeah,
just
most of the gut bacteria or the gut microorganisms, as you know, really are quite finicky, and you can't really culture them easily. We know they exist if we look at the genomics and so forth, but it's not easy to grow them out. So the probiotics usually are growing out the species that are easy to grow, cheapest to grow, and there's a vast number of organisms that you really cannot grow out. They live in anaerobic conditions. They're, very fastidious in terms of temperature and things like that, and light exposure. So as you said, it's way more complicated than people make it out to be.
Mark, I don't want to let you go until I find out something. So in Cincinnati, we've been trying for a long time to sort of a farm to table program, trying to get higher quality foods into our public school system. And the industrial model, it's federal dollars that come in. So you have to get bids on everything, and it's absolutely impossible to compete, with the great big giant food companies. How did you get things changed in your hospital? I mean, that's probably easier than a school, but it's still a pretty big institution.
Yeah, I mean, my hospital, I'm at a 24-bed critical access hospital. So again, it's like moving a small rock versus if you went into Mass General. And it probably was like the wisdom of the crowds. So we had, I don't know, a dozen nurses who had lost 50 pounds, some actually 150 pounds, by just listening into the counseling we were giving to patients with diabetes. So after a couple of years of, patients, responding, and staff, right? Like responding in this amazing way. And then I had a very collaborative dean who had lost weight on a low carb diet. So my dean understood and had my back, and we presented this, and it went through. But unless you have, I think it's a bottom up, if you're going to make change in the hospital, it's a bottom up revolution, meaning you have to communicate, you have to have support of the people that this is the right thing to do, versus just top down saying we're getting rid of sugar. And then you just you do it, right? You just make a press, and but again, like you're going to have barriers, same as the school. We have a farm. We're going to have another workshop this summer, farm to school workshop. So we're trying to find workarounds, against the policies that exist, because you can't get rid of the USDA, but you have to try to find some creative solutions.
Yeah.
It's called positive deviance, so you look for local solutions that work, and maybe we can share some ideas. Like if someone has an idea that's working somewhere, I want to learn about that. Well, what are you doing?
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Probably part of the problem in schools now is, there used to be the cafeteria people who prepared meals. That's all gone.
No, it's all
All they
prepared
do
now.
is
It's all comes out of a truck.
Comes out of a truck,
and it's in a pocket, right?
Yeah.
And they don't even need a knife and a fork anymore, because that's more money, right?
So
They
you
just
can't
eat
bring
it from
them.
a
You
pocket.
can't bring them produce from the farm. They have no way of preparing
No,
it.
it's dangerous. It's highly dangerous because it might be contaminated.
Exactly.
But that fruit that's in the heavy syrup that's in the can, that's a fruit, right? And that's encouraged. You don't have 5 servings of fruit a day.
Exactly.
And then they're following the guidelines that the American Academy of Pediatrics will put out. Have 5 servings of fruit a day, and they're having 5 fruit cups a day, and they count orange juice as a fruit, and ketchup's a vegetable. Pizza has vegetables on it. Yeah, I mean, we all know on this call it's nonsensical, but it's government policy.
Well,
someone had a question about glucose monitors up there too.
I didn't see
yeah,
that.
I think glucose monitors are kind of the wave of the future because patients learn. So there's one about, CGM technology up in the chat. Yeah, so a little bit on CGMs. I have a YouTube talk on it on Low Carb Down Under that we could share, but I use a ton of glucose monitors, and we actually have a study ongoing now on diabetes remission, and we're almost done our study, 4-month pilot, giving new diabetics one of these Freestyle Libres, which you can get 2 of these sensors. So this is a continuous glucose monitor. It's a little sensor that sits in my arm. So you can get $75 for even cash for a month, which are 14 days. That's 2 14-day monitors, and this might be $50. But you can see what your individual response is to your food. So the technology has gotten more accessible, more affordable. And I think any diabetes patient who doesn't know their response to food should even wear one for a few months or a few weeks. And then they'll be like, oh my gosh, because they check their sugars maybe once a day or maybe not at all. They're told, well, come back in 3 months. You don't need your A1C 6.5. You don't need to check your sugar, but their heart attacks waiting to happen. But they don't know, right? They're told whole wheat bread, but they don't know, right? But when you can't unsee what you see, so if you eat bread and you see your sugar goes up to 250, hello, don't eat bread. They have alarms, right? So it'll beep, and so they'll learn, everyone will learn what's their response to exercise, right? Do they go up? Do they go down? Everyone's different. Gosh, some people might be able to eat a banana. Others will shoot up to 200, because there's 30 grams of carbohydrates in a banana, but it's very, the obvious stuff is just right there and they can't unsee it. But ask your clinicians for one. And if they, you don't need that, find a new clinician. It's like having a dashboard on your car. If I was checking my sugar 4 times a day for like 8 years until these became easier and just simple to use, and now it's like it's my friend, like it and I learn from it every day. And you can see from mine, as someone who doesn't make a lot of insulin, my A1C is not perfect because I'm on the type 1 spectrum. So this is my lowest sugar today is 101. This is my low point today, outside of the middle of the night. And when I exercised in the morning and my sugar went up to about 150 because my body makes glucose when I exercise, but but it's flat. So glucose stability is actually really important because glucose instability makes you more vulnerable to plaque rupture. So for myself, if my A1C is 5.9, which isn't perfect, but my glucose is stable, my coronary artery calcium score is 0. So right now I've got no calcium in my arteries, no calcium. So I'm okay with that. Like for what I have, it's not a perfect blood sugar, but it's stable and I don't have calcium in my arteries. So, I might die of nothing if I keep doing this. So I'll repeat my calcium score every 3 to 4 years just to make sure there isn't any plaque developing on my arteries. And right now it's still 0. So again, we're all our own N of 1. But yeah, it's play with them. They're so simple.
Right.
And we'll get the data coming out of our little pilot study is amazing. We have people who started A1Cs in 9-10 range in 1 week, no medications, blood glucoses that look better than my chart right there. they're like down in the 80s, flat, boring, and they're losing weight.
I just want to point out, just because we have been talking a lot about vitamin C, that if you supplement, you might see an false high.
It gives you a warning to not. So this monitor will tell me not to supplement vitamin C. I don't know the mechanism of that, Vyvyane. Why does the vitamin C?
It's a sensor and the oxidation on the sensor.
That's what it is. Because
Yeah,
it always comes up when you put a new sensor. If you're taking over 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, it might give you, and you have to click OK that you've read the disclaimer.
Because when we supplement, we always expect the reading to be higher.
And we cross-check it again. Like if you have one of these, you should. In my bag, I have a glucometer, just your standard glucometer. So if something, you should always cross-check a little bit. There's always variance in
glucometer too, Mark. I think
will that respond to vitamin C also?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
why we go to conferences, learn new stuff.
Probably a serum. Like
you need a vein, to venous sample. But it gives you information. gives you really good information.
We're getting close to the end of the program today. I can't thank both of you enough for spending time with us. You have talked about many things that I don't think a lot of us knew before and understand, and really excited to learn more about. Vyvyane, you want to leave us one simple message for us out here who are, it sounds like we've all got metabolic syndrome. There's only what, 21 of us percent that don't?
12%.
12%. It's even worse.
12%, right?
Adults.
Well, that's even worse.
Yeah, I mean, I do talk a lot about what I think we don't talk enough about is normal weight obesity. And if we're going by percent body fat, which, by DEXA, not by the bioimpedance that your personal trainer has at the gym, but by DEXA, which is an X-ray. If we go by percent body fat, I strongly suspect the prevalence of obesity in this country is in the 90% range, not 42%, okay, by percent body fat. So basically, I think, until proven otherwise, we should suspect that we have, some form of metabolic dysfunction to get tested. But even if you're having trouble getting your practitioner to go on board, I mean, some of the things I think that were mentioned in today's conference will go a long way in helping you get back on track, right? Eating real foods, eating a lower carb load. Institute of Medicine's RDA, I don't always agree with the RDA, but it's 130 grams a day. The average American eats close to 400 grams a day, 152 pounds of sugar per year. So, I think if we even go with the RDA, we still be better off, right? I mean, seriously, that would be, yeah. So I think those basic things and focusing on getting our bodies back to, I call it, the factory settings, right? Because we messed it up. So go back, reset to the factory settings, and I think that would solve a lot of our problems.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mark.
Yeah, and I have a hard stop at 5. I'm here to build in a conference room at the kindness of a lodge because I'm on vacation. But I think hope and joy and find your tribe and change your identity. So when people start to restore their health, right, they kind of have viewed themselves, and society made them, they're defeated, right? They view themselves as unhealthy, overweight, fat, all this negative terminology, and that's their identity. But and they tend to kind of hang with people that have a similar defeatist identity. But when you get someone feeling healthy again and eating better, your actions change your identity. So the more you just do the same actions every day, that shapes your mind. Your mind can't overcome your actions, but you just line up every day and repeat, and ultimately you're going to change your identity and you're going to love yourself. So unless you're going to create a new avatar for yourself, and that's going to be you and who you are, and that's going to be a healthy identity. And when you changed your identity, you're good, right? I'm a healthy person. I'm an athlete. I've got one patient who lost 180, 200 pounds. We wrote a blog on her, and she's like, now her identity is she's an athlete. She posts her workouts, and she's in the running group. It's incredible. Like, she's good right now. She's fine. She found a new tribe. Went through some trauma, some serious trauma, right? Some relationship trauma, and now she's healed. So create a new identity, and that's where health coaches and support. Without support, without love, they'll never get out of this mess. But that's all I got for you guys, and I'm gonna have to sign off here because I have to exit this. But it's been a privilege, and certainly with Vyvyane. Yeah, yeah. Take care. You guys have a wonderful weekend. And thank you for the invite.
Well, that draws to conclusion day 2 of our Nourishing Life conference. We are so glad to be able to be the host for this conference. And thanks again to everyone for your presentations, questions, and participation. We hope that as growers, healthcare providers, and community members, you have benefited from your time with us and feel inspired to become the change makers in your corner of the world. Have a beautiful and restful weekend. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.